All right, awesome, everybody. All right, so yeah, hopefully everyone had a great weekend. Let's get ready for the week coming up ahead. Obviously, a really big one with FOMC coming up on Wednesday. Remember, FOMC is at 2 p.m. Eastern, and then we have Powell speaking at 2:30. Fed decisions on interest rates are obviously going to be huge. Everyone's really kind of looking at that, especially with the markets being in a like 10 to 12% kind of correction from the highs over the last month. Is the Fed going to take that into account? Are we going to see interest rates come down quicker than what we expected? I probably think not, but I think the Fed is going to stay their course and probably keep the cuts to like 2 cuts this year. But we could maybe see something different. We'll have to see, obviously, what ends up playing out. I suspect we're going to see the same course of action. I don't think the Fed really cares about like a 10% drop in the markets to really shift things, but we'll see. Obviously, we'll get an idea. Inflation data was a little bit lower than expected, but it wasn't anything like crazy. We were only really colder by like a 0.1%. So yeah, we'll see what ends up playing out with the Fed, how they approach this next meeting, what we get out of that meeting. And then from there, we can kind of make a better decision on what is going to happen in the markets. But as always, remember, we want to wait until the reaction and to see how the markets are going to hold up and how things are going to play out, right? Never try to like front run things that are playing out. Obviously, you could take like low risk entries for potential ideas and trades, but we always want to wait for a trend to be established. Right now, we have a trend to the downside. Until the markets prove that they're not going to continue to downtrend, you want to continue to look for things to reject, specifically at important levels, right? You need the markets to prove themselves, right? Same thing that I was saying, for example, when we were in a super strong uptrend the last like 2-3 years right here. You want to continue to play longs. There's no reason to look to play against the trend, right? You want to buy the dips, play things to the upside, right? Now that markets are in a daily downtrend, you want to see how they react to the key moving averages. If you get a break over the key moving averages and then you hold above, that could be a nice retrace idea, right, for a reversal. But if the markets are going to reverse, there's going to be so many opportunities to play the trend, guys. So I always urge, don't be someone who tries to time the bottom and then gets absolutely smoked playing against the trend, right? If a trend is going to develop and we are genuinely going to see new all-time highs, like let's say in the next few months, you are easily going to get a good entry, because what ends up happening, the markets will get back above the moving averages, they will pull back into the moving averages, and then this will be our entry right here on a wedge pop, right? We've talked about this multiple times. That is the reversal trade that I'm going to be looking at. So it's not don't try to be a hero and guess when things are, going to bottom. Instead, look for high probability ideas that could potentially play out, and then see what the markets do from there and react. That's how I always like to approach trading. That way you do it in a risk managed manner, and you're not just trying to guess when things are going to be moving or trying to predict, because predicting the market will do you really no good, and you won't get any really consistency out of that. So this is a look here on the S&P. Now, what I wanted to show you guys is we do have a pretty big development, right? So we were talking about this earlier last week on the Sunday scan. I talked about the 50 weekly EMA on the S&P and QQQ. So if you're not familiar with the EMAs, they're the exponential moving averages. Basically, they tell you what the trend is on the time frame that you're looking at, right? So if we're on the weekly, as long as stocks are above the 50, the 21, and the 8-day EMAs, you're technically in an uptrend, right? The 50 EMA on the weekly is usually kind of like that last battle spot for bulls, that if they don't hold, you might start entering a more bearish period or corrective period. We saw a pretty brief period here in 2022 when we had the Russia-Ukraine war that kind of started this move down, but we were clearly in a corrective period, right? You could see that the markets got below the 50 weekly EMA multiple times, held below, even kind of used it as resistance to make new lows until we started to trend back up. Since we came out of that kind of correction or bearish market, we haven't been below the 50 weekly EMA for more than like 1 week. Obviously, we had this little test here that we went below and then got back above. We haven't been under that spot, right? So to me, that is why we're at such like a key spot right now, because if the markets can hold here, we have a very clear high risk to reward potential low being put in, right? If the markets take out that low and we stay below the weekly 50, then there's a higher probability that things are going to start actually becoming a weekly downtrend, right? So on the weekly time frame, we are still in an uptrend. On the daily time frame, we're clearly in a downtrend, right? But you have to know your time frames. What are the time frames we're looking at? Weekly and daily are going to be the most important. So on the weekly, we're at a big weekly spot. See if we can hold this level, right? And also, remember, the biggest reversals come with volume, right? So look at the volume patterns that we saw right here into the lows. A ton of volume on this potential hammer here on the S&P to end the week, right? Now, does that necessarily mean we have a bottom? No, right? We have to see what the markets do. We have to see if we can get above the daily moving averages, get constructive, and see where that takes us. But that is an observation that we need to know. Why? Look at the last time we made a low here in August. Look at the volume, right? It was significantly higher than the last like 3-4 months that traded before that, right? And same thing right here. When we started to make the top, right? This was kind of the topping process that we made here. We did kind of break the high, but then we ended up coming back down. That was made on significant volume, right? So usually all the reversals in the markets occur on super high volume. You could see right here as well, ton of volume into the low right here. We bounced off the weekly 50, moved higher. Same thing right here, ton of volume, bounce off the weekly moving averages, moved higher, right? So usually all the big volume is kind of seen in a big turning point. Now, again, does that necessarily mean that things will have to turn? No, but it is an observation that you want to pay attention to. And now you have a very critical level to watch, right? That's the whole idea of trying to find these key spots. Now you have a level that you can use to trade, because again, we're not just trying to gamble off random spots, just predict that the market's going to bounce. No, we want to use key levels to have a high probability of potential reversal ideas, right? And if the markets can hold, we know that things could reverse. If not, then we know we have more downside to go. And now will help us trade that downside, right? So if we break under that low at that's 548, I think. I'm going to tell you guys the exact level. It's right here into this low. 549.68, we'll probably see new lows into 536 and then potentially 507 on the S&P, right? So that's going to be your key level to watch for the week. 550 to 549.5. That's going to be the spot that we're going to watch. As long as the markets can hold there, we do have a good possibility for potential reversals. If we can't hold that level, I do expect to see lower on the markets and potentially lower for the next like 3 to 4 months, because that is already entering a weekly downtrend, which usually when you get under the weekly moving averages, we do kind of end up getting into a prolonged period of downside, right? So if you go back and really study some of the price action, which I recommend everyone do, specifically if you haven't really traded a bear market yet, I would go and see how the markets have reacted to specific moves, right? So for example, every other time we've gone under the 50 weekly EMA, we've had a prolonged period of downside. So right here, you can see this is 2022. Right here, this was 2020 during COVID. We entered a prolonged period of downside. Obviously, it ended up kind of snapping back really quickly with all the QE that we had in the markets, but it was pretty good downside, right? Right here, for example, this was the China trade war in 2018. We had prolonged downside under the 50 EMA. Every other time we've held, we've had a nice bounce higher, right? Same thing right here. In 2015, we had choppier markets, things were basing, we were under the 50 weekly. But look at every other time the markets were above the 50 weekly EMA, you had a super strong trend that usually always resulted in new highs, right? So go back and study this because it's very important. And that's going to tell you how important this hold right now is to see if we can hold the spot. If we don't hold, I expect a prolonged 2 to 3 month, if not more, period of downside or just choppiness, right? Either one could play out. Depends on how bad like the overall macro environment gets. Are we going to enter a recession, or is a recession off the table, right? Like how are things going to look? How are tariffs going to impact the economy? Things like that. That's going to be super important. And we'll see how that plays out. That'll probably play out within the next few months as well. And we'll have a little bit more data on all that. So that is going to be what I'm watching. So to keep it simple, key levels you want to watch, 550 is going to be your level to the downside on the S&P. If we can hold that, we can continue to see a bounce higher. Now, where does this bounce really, where can it take us, right? Like where could we get that makes sense? Well, you want to look at the previous pivot, right? Where's the previous pivot where a lot of the downside began once we stopped holding that level? It's right here at this previous low. You could see we held it once right here. We tried bouncing here, and then once we broke under, that's really where the downside came, right? So from here, where can we see some upside to? 576, that's going to be your level, right? So if things are going to continue to bounce this week, 576 is going to be the level to watch. That also also aligns with the 21 EMA, which is coming down, and that is going to be the next level. Now, obviously, we have the 8 EMA coming down on price as well. That's going to be like the first intermediate level. So right at Friday's high as well, that's going to be 564. If we break 564, it's a very high probability that we get 575. We also have this little gap to fill as well right here. You can see from Monday where we kind of gapped down, made that big push lower. We have that gap to fill up to 575. That's going to be the next spot to watch if we can break over 564. So those are going to be your 3 key levels to watch throughout the week. If we can break 564, we're looking for a push up to 575. If we break under 549, we're looking for a push down to 535. Keep it simple. Use the levels to trade. Obviously, again, look at what the markets are doing. We are below the moving averages, right? Every single time we have tested into the 8 EMA over the last 2 weeks, we have gotten a push lower, right? So do you trust the market to potentially reverse now? Well, it could potentially happen, but overall, the trend has shown you that every time we test the 8-day, we do get a rejection. So what I would recommend to do is wait for a break over if you're going to look to take longs. And if you're going to look to take shorts, look to see if you're going to get a rejection out of that level, right? Ideally, what you're looking for is a lot of volume showing you that sellers are re-entering the trade and getting aggressive, right? That's what I'll be looking for. So those are your key levels there on the S&P. Now going into QQQ, the tech index, weekly chart, daily chart looks almost identical pretty much, very similar stuff. The only difference is QQQ did actually close under the weekly 50. It's like barely, but you could see we did actually close under. So that is something to watch, obviously. Again, a ton of volume off the lows. This was a very key spot to hold. Last 2 tests, we did hold and make new highs. We held, made new highs, right? So again, not saying that has to happen here, but there is a probability that it could occur just based off the fact that it has happened before in the past, specifically in this uptrend that we've been playing, right? So that is something to look at on the NASDAQ. Now, going into the smaller time frames, really low volume here on this bounce on Friday, right? That's something to take into consideration. Usually we would want to see some high volume to kind of back the fact that there could potentially be a sustained bounce. However, there wasn't really that much volume, so that's something to look at. Now, your levels are going to be very simple as well. This is something I talked about last week. Look for the markets to get tight, right? Why did we really kind of stay in range over the last 4 or 5 days? Because the market's already made a very big move down, right? If you measure the move from the high to the low, we really made like a 13% move off the highs on the tech index without really any consolidation, right? Usually the markets don't just move straight down or move straight up. What ends up happening is you have consolidation, next leg, consolidation, next leg, right? Obviously more so to the upside. The downside does play out usually a little bit faster, but even with downside moves, there needs to be consolidation. Why? Because the markets can't just move in one direction all the time, right? You do need some counter trend moves to fuel the downside move, right? It adds more fuel to shorts to get back in, play the next leg down. So we are getting pretty tight here, which is great, right? This is exactly what we wanted. So now we have some pretty simple spots to trade, in my opinion. Just like the S&P, the NASDAQ QQQ is very, very tight. So we're looking at this low 466. If we break 466, we're looking at some levels below, right? That's going to be 446 or 450. And then this low here at 422. Those could be your 2 targets moving lower if we continue to reject. Now, into the highs, what we're looking at, if we want to get a potential sustained like downtrend break here. So you can see like if you draw this trend line from the highs, we are peaking a little bit out of that spot. Now, again, this doesn't necessarily mean we get a move back to the highs here, but it could potentially play a little bit of a reversal idea on this. So if we get over this 481 level or 482-ish, we could see that 21 EMA that I talked about, right? And same thing as the S&P, you're looking for the level where we kind of started the big downside, right? That's going to be a retest spot. So we have a little bit of room from 481 up to 500, and that's also like a whole number level to watch, right? 500, obviously big kind of like whole number spot to potentially look for a rejection at. So that's going to be the upside target potential for Qs. So those are going to be your 2 levels to watch for the S&P QQQ. Overall, bias for the week, I want to see the markets hold up the weekly moving averages, right? That's going to be the most important thing. So there's a lot to go into this week. I would always say be objective, be ready to play both sides. The markets are literally in a super tight range. So wherever you break, you should play that side, right? You shouldn't really come in with a specific like bias. But however, remember the markets have been downtrending on the daily, right? So you do want to keep that in mind. That means upside breakouts might be a little bit, getting stuffed a little bit quicker. Things might might not follow through as much. However, if you're looking at stocks that are above the daily moving averages, those are going to be the ones you want to long specifically. Why? Because they're going to have a little bit more when they make the move, right? Because they are above the moving averages. So there's going to be a little bit more juice to them. For example, something like BABA, right? I know this is obviously a different market. This is in the China market, but BABA has been incredibly strong. Even with the market, the US market's a little bit weaker, right? You could see that this has made new highs. It's held above the moving averages, right? Looks amazing. Why? Because it's above the moving averages. It's in a very strong uptrend. So these are the types of stocks you want to look to long, and you want to look to short things that are below the moving averages, things that are weak, something like Amazon, right? This one's below the moving averages, so we want to look to play it down, right? We wouldn't necessarily want to time the top on something like BABA because it's been so strong, right? This is not something that makes sense to short. So keep it simple and look to play the trend, right? If things are going to move lower, look for things that are moving lower already, that are below the moving averages, and that are showing you signs of weaknesses, right? So that's what I'd be watching for. Now, going into IWM, the Russell, this is going to be a big one to watch for FOMC. The Russell moves a ton. Whenever we do have the Fed meetings. You could see here on December 18th after the FOMC, we had an absolutely insane huge move down, right? So usually the Russell likes to move a lot during FOMC, and a lot of the risk on names do as well, right? Risk on usually going to be things that are like more growth companies, small caps. These are usually going to rely on rates being low to be able to have a bunch of funds to grow their businesses, right? So they need low interest rates. They need a lot of money in the economy for people to be spending. So when consumer spending is down, these are the ones that are usually not doing as well. So if the Fed says more interest rate cuts, I like IWM to the upside. If we get the same kind of guideline that we've been seeing the Fed kind of talk about, 2 cuts this year, then we'll probably see some more weakness on IWM. Now, on the weekly time frame, IWM is below the weekly 50 EMA. It's already like kind of making that move compared to like Qs. Qs are sitting right at the 50 weekly, SPY are sitting right at the weekly 50, but IWM is already kind of playing out this downside move. Now, remember, this did also occur in 2021, right? The market here wasn't really topping out, but IWM already topped out. And it already made a lot of the downside before the rest of the market did, right? So the market was already kind of declining lower here, but this was already starting to bottom. So IWM usually moves a little bit like before everything else. Same thing with Bitcoin, I would say. Bitcoin gives us an idea on like how all these risk on names are going to be doing. So we need to see if IWM can start finding a bottom here. If it doesn't, we have a lot of downside potential left for IWM. And then markets can potentially follow lower into some of these levels here that we tested in like 2023. 2022 on the Russell. So that's something to pay attention to. The Dow is right off the 50 weekly EMA as well. This one hasn't tested the weekly 50 since this big breakout here in 2023. You could see it hasn't even gone like close to the 50 weekly. This was kind of like the closest it got to. So first 50 weekly test on this is going to be a big spot to watch, right? Usually the first test of an important key level is going to bring a lot more support than something that is tested multiple times, right? So we'll see if buyers step in here. On the daily time frame, again, it's still in a big daily downtrend, so be a little bit careful. Want to see industrials hold up a little bit more. These have been a little bit stronger while the rest of the market has been weaker, but a lot of the selling last week was also in industrial, so they started to sell off banks. Healthcare was even a little bit weaker, right? Those are some sectors that have been super strong recently. They also started to sell those off. So be a little bit careful with the Dow, see how that sets up. If tech is going to continue to be weak, you'll probably be seeing more strength in Dow stocks, industrial, cyclical, stuff like that. So watching that to see what plays out. Now, Bitcoin's going to be a strong watch as well. Why? Because it's off the weekly 50, right? Literally everything is testing the weekly 50 EMA. And if you look at Bitcoin, every single time over the last 3 years, it's tested the 50 weekly, we got new highs. Very similar to what I was showing you guys on the S&P, right? So why is this so important? Well, if it doesn't hold the weekly 50, what do we expect to happen, right? Just more downside. It's very simple. We don't want to overcomplicate it. If we get a break of the weekly 50, it just tells us more downside to come. That should be what is playing in our heads, right? So that's going to be a super important spot to watch. I'm watching to see if we can hold here. Obviously, we also have a big spot here, like 73 to 75K on Bitcoin. That's going to be a big spot that it broke out of. So if it holds, it might be able to come back up to the highs at 100K, right? If it breaks under, probably going to test some of these lows here at 50. So that's going to be something to watch. And also remember, Bitcoin does kind of predate the market, like in terms of the move. It does like to kind of be the front runner. Whenever the markets were super strong, Bitcoin was already kind of making that move to the all-time highs. Over the last few weeks, Bitcoin was already kind of making the moves lower here, right? As the market was kind of holding up a bit. So it has been moving a little bit before. So if Bitcoin starts to bounce, it's bouncing a little bit off the lows here, but if it starts to bounce and hold up, maybe we could see the markets do that as well, right? So I always watch Bitcoin just to kind of get an idea on how the risk on names are looking. Now, a little bit more important, watch the VIX, right? This gave us a lot of clues, especially on Friday. I was talking about this a lot in the live trading. When we broke under this 25 level, that opened up for more upside for QQQ and SPY, right? So even though SPY and Qs are really only up like one day off the lows, look at the VIX, right? The VIX is down 4 days in a row. It was red 4 days in a row, right? And the S&P and the NASDAQ are only up one day. So what does that tell you? Well, it tells you some fear might be kind of, exiting the markets in terms of fear and a little bit of uncertainty. Now, does that necessarily mean that there is going to be no fear at all? No, the VIX is probably going to stay elevated for a while just because there's a lot of headlines and stuff to navigate and a lot of economic stuff to look at. But if the VIX is moving lower, obviously that does help the markets out a little bit because the less fear we have in the markets, the more certain things are, usually the better stocks perform. So that's something to watch. Now, what are the key levels going into next week? Very, very simple. Right here where we're trading at 21.44. Why is this so important? Look at where the big downside move was made last week, right? Or the week before, even on the S&P, right when the VIX broke this 21.65 level. That is right here on this day where we broke down, right? And since then, we've gone a very steep move to the downside. So if we break under that spot on the VIX, well, what do we expect to happen? More upside for tech and SPY, right? It's just a tool to use to potentially give us confirmation that we're having less fear in the markets, a little bit less uncertainty. And obviously it's going to be very big for us as options traders, right? Because when the VIX is lower, usually that means premiums are going to be lower as well, because the VIX does imply the volatility in the market. So if there's a high VIX, usually option premiums are going to be pretty expensive. So the cheaper the VIX is, the better it is, right? For us as options traders, because we get cheaper premiums. So that's what we're looking for. Now, remember, don't get caught trying to trade stocks and the VIX comes down and then you get absolutely destroyed by the implied volatility difference in the move that VIX made, right? So if VIX comes down while it was high before and you bought options, your premiums might lose a little bit of value just because of the fact that the VIX is moving lower, right? So look at the Vega on your options contracts to kind of get an idea on how much you're going to lose if the VIX moves. So I'm watching the VIX at this 21.75 level, right? If we bounce here, we have a potential to see lower, right? It's very, very simple. We're not going to be looking at too much complicated stuff this week because the market's made it simple for us. It has a very tight range. If it breaks the range to the highs, we could see a little bit more of a relief. If we see that break at the lows, we could see a little bit more downside, and the VIX is going to confirm it. So if we break under this 21.5 level on the VIX, we could see down to 19.5. That would obviously open up for a little bit more upside on the rest of the equities market. So that's something to watch as well. Now, last index that I'm going to kind of go over really quickly, ARK. Why is this so important? Because this is risk on names, right? So anything like Tesla, Palantir, HIMS, RKLB, stocks that have been kind of getting a little bit destroyed over the past few weeks, specifically Tesla, right? This one has been kind of leading the downside over the last specifically like 2-3 months since the beginning of the year. These are going to be impacted a lot by the way ARK moves, right? Because obviously ARK owns a lot of Tesla, but also it kind of gives us an idea of how the momentum is going to look like in the market. So are we forming a potential wedge here? Probably likely not, because this is a little bit steep of a wedge, but it does look like the selling is starting to slow down a little bit into the lows. How do I know that? Well, you can see right here, for example, every single day we are making new lows. We continued to push lower, right? There was a new low, new low, new low, new low, right? But what is happening now? Well, this usually happens when sellers are a little bit exhausted and markets want to kind of move the other way. You get a new low, and then the next day you get kind of a snapback, right? You get a new low, then you reclaim the previous low, right? So what ends up happening is instead of just moving down like this and holding below the previous lows in a very strong trend, you end up kind of getting a little bit wedged like this, right? And that's usually when the biggest reversals occur, because there's so many sellers here that are a little bit overextended, right? The time to short, or the best short, was here, right? So once they kind of get a little bit extended down here, what ends up happening is price will wedge until one day all those sellers get squeezed out and moves the other way. Now, again, not necessarily meaning it has to come all the way up to the highs, but it could act as a little bit of a spring to kind of push price and reverse it. So that's what I'm watching on ARK, right? If we can get over $50 specifically on ARK, we could see a nice reversal in the market, specifically stuff like Tesla, RKLB, Palantir. Even Palantir looks pretty decent, right? Same kind of idea that I mentioned on ARK. You see how it, like, when it was moving down here, it was making new lows basically almost every single day. Once we started getting into the support level right here, we're actually starting to see that a lot of these breakdowns right here are failing to hold lower, right? So what does that indicate? Well, it indicates some sellers here might be trapped and buyers want to start reversing the trend, right? Is it a little bit early? Yeah, it's early. It's not necessarily guaranteed that it's going to move back up, but there is some probabilities here for a potential reversal. So this is some stuff that I am watching in the markets if we do continue to see a little bit of strength from the downside. So that's pretty much going to be a recap of the major indices. I do want to really go over something super important that I like in the markets. This is themes and narratives, right? This is stuff that you guys hear me talk about a lot, right? Whenever you're looking for a long or whenever you're looking for a short, it's always best to trade the best stocks in the market for longs and the worst stocks in the market for shorts. Obviously, that's a given, right? You want to trade the weakest stocks to the downside because they're going to give you the most downside. You want to trade the strongest stocks in the market to the upside because they're going to give you the most upside, right? But how do we actually identify these? Well, for the upside, it's super easy because which stocks have held up super well while the markets have been weaker? Very clear, right? We've had a lot of very clear themes, and these are the ones I want to go over. So the first one is going to be China stocks. Look at FXI. This is the China large cap ETF. It's gone basically vertically up while the S&P and Qs have gone basically to the downside, right? So it's kind of been moving opposite of what the S&P is doing. And if you've been looking at the weekly time frame on something like this, it looks like it's about to go much higher, right? So this doesn't look like something that's going to go lower. And if you've really been struggling to trade in the market, specifically in like the last 2 to 3 weeks when things have been just going straight down, there's always a bull market somewhere, right? There's always a bull market somewhere. For example, look at gold, right? Gold has just gone straight up, right? So instead of making it hard on yourself and trying to trade stocks that are below the moving averages or trade against the trend, look for where the bull markets are, right? There's always bull markets if you're someone who wants to specifically trade longs, right? Obviously, if you're not and you like to trade shorts as well, there's opportunities there. But if you're someone who specifically likes to trade things to the upside, there's always going to be a bull market somewhere. So something like gold has just been moving straight up, has been giving you a ton of really good entries right here, for example, on the breakout, big moves up, right? Look at something like FXI, China stocks. These have been giving totally amazing entries. You had this really nice move right here through this wedge, popped, moved higher. Now it's kind of wedging again, pop, move higher, right? So it's giving you a ton of really good entries. So a few amazing stocks that I really like to the upside out of China, right? First one, and this is probably the best one, I would definitely be long this one, BABA. This one has been probably the leader over the last few weeks in China stocks. It's also the largest cap China stock, right? I think behind maybe Tencent, or Tencent and BABA are super close. But these are the largest cap China stocks. So if China stocks are going to be strong, obviously BABA is usually going to lead higher. So this one looks phenomenal, right? If you guys remember our stage analysis of the market, this is a stage 2 breakout, right? We have this kind of base that played out right here. This is stage 1 base. What ends up happening when you break out of a stage 1 base, you enter the best cycle in the markets, and that's called a stage 2, right? And it looks something like this. This broke out of a stage 1, then it entered a stage 2, and this usually gives you a ton of upside. So something like BABA looks absolutely phenomenal. I'm already long this, but if you're not long this, what I would look for is the break of 145. Why 145? Well, if you go on the daily chart, you could see it setting up in a super tight pennant like this. And 145 is clearly the resistance level, right? You could see it rejected once here, it rejected twice here. So we know if it breaks over this level, it's clearly going to give us a very big move to the upside. And if we look at the weekly time frame, well, I mean, it doesn't really have much resistance on the weekly until some of these big levels right here, like 170. That's a 30-point move almost, right? So that's really, really nice. So we're looking at stuff like this for potential upside. BABA looks very, very good. We also have Futu is another very good one. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this stock. It's a broker out of China. Another one that broke out of a stage 2 base, right? Broke out here, retested. Now it's setting up to move higher. Look at the daily time frame. Like, This should really be a super easy trade. All the China stocks should be super easy in my opinion, especially if you're very good at longing stocks and you had a very good return in 2024. These should be super easy trades for you because these are the types of setups we were getting almost every single day in 2024. So if you're, looking to long stuff, China should be super nice, right? So Futu looks amazing. I would look for this one over 126. Another one that looks good. This is another finance stock, a real estate company out of China, BEKE, right? Another really nice stage 2 base that's forming here. You have this big base that is playing out. Now you have a potential stage 2 breakout that is going to occur. This one looks very good, over $25. Another amazing one. I also really like JD. This is another tight one on the weekly and daily time frames. If it can get through like 43.5, a ton of upside potential left for this one. Another one that I really like, I can honestly list a bunch of these, but YumC, another really nice one as well. This is a restaurant chain, but looks absolutely phenomenal. Looks like if it breaks over 51.3, it's going to give you an absolutely big move to the upside. So a theme you definitely want to pay attention to, China stocks, especially again, if you're someone who likes to long stocks, you need to be looking at China because these are where the best setups are right now. So I'm looking at Baba, I'm looking at Futu, I'm looking at BEKE, JD, YumC, a ton of stocks. I can even name more. NIO looks really good. LI, XBEV, some of these Chinese EV companies also look very good. The ones that I just mentioned. So that's something you'll look at as well. Two more themes that I really like. One of them is going to be insurance stocks, right? So insurance stocks have been absolutely soaring, specifically over the last few months. Been super strong. I'm already long Root, this stock right here, ROOT, but you can see how incredibly strong a stock like this has been compared to the market. The market has been making new lows, moving somewhere here. This one's making new highs, right? So it's clearly super strong. One that you want to be long if you want to be long any stocks. It's just making new highs. It's moving super well. On the weekly, again, this all stems from the weekly, guys. I always recommend to start looking at the weekly timeframes on any stock out there when you're looking at the analysis for it. What is the weekly doing? Look at this stock right here, right? This came all the way down from these highs here at 380, all the way down. What is it doing now? Well, it's clearly in a weekly uptrend, right? It continues to make new highs. It continues to hold the moving averages. So there's no reason not to play the trend here. And it's also a very strong stock here on the daily time frame, right? So it broke over this 145 level. Looks like it wants to continue to go higher. Another really good ones. LMND, another really nice one on the insurance side, right? It's in a very nice daily and weekly wedge. And again, look at the weekly. What's happening on the weekly? Well, it's breaking out of a huge base and now it's retesting, right? So another really nice one. LMND could set up for a really nice move higher. This is one that I have on my focus list. A few other ones that look good. AIG, this is another insurance stock breaking out of a multi-month base. This sector is just super strong and it's really like unwatched, right? Not many people watch insurance stocks. So these are usually makes for some of the best trades. Ton of volume on these too. Allstate, another one to look at. So again, there's a ton of these stocks that I can name. I'm going to show you guys the ones that I like the most, but yeah, there's definitely a theme here as well. And last but not least, another sector and theme that I really want to show you guys that has been performing super well, specifically over the last 2 to 3 days, has been quantum, right? Quantum stocks. So if you guys remember, quantum stocks were super strong going into the new year. Specifically after Trump got elected, we had a lot of buzz from Microsoft, Google. They were all trying to develop quantum chips. Get really into kind of like a breakthrough in quantum computing. And we had stocks like QBTS, QUBT, all these stocks make a significant move higher, right? From there, if you guys remember, we had that Jensen headline. So the CEO of NVIDIA was talking about how like quantum is maybe like 10 or 15 years away. And all these stocks just absolutely plummeted, right? But since then, these all held up very well. And what I think has been going on under the hood is institutions have been kind of accumulating these on the pullback, right? So a big pullback occurred. This has been getting accumulated, right? It's been holding up very well. And now you could see it absolutely ignited back to the highs, specifically QBTS up 50% and almost all the way back to the highs where the headline was made, right? So before the Jensen headline, we're all the way back up here, right? So I think quantum could still be an amazing theme to watch. QBTS is all the way back up. RGTI is another stock that I really like. This is another quantum stock. This is one that I actually longed yesterday on Friday. right as it was breaking out over here. Look at how much upside these stocks have, right? If QBTS was able to move all the way back to the highs, what makes you think that something like this one can't, right? So not saying it necessarily has to, but it does have a lot of upside potential. So I'm watching this one to potentially come back up to $14. $21 could be a nice target to watch for it as well. Another really good one, IONQ, right? If you guys remember, this was actually one of the first quantum stocks to lead the major quantum move. This stock went from like $7 all the way to $50, right? So that's a huge return, almost 10x on it. And now it's all the way back to like 18, right? So remember, the stocks that can 10x, 5x, 15x, 20x that have done that in the past are the stocks that can move the same way again, right? Look at something like Carvana. Remember this stock? It moved all the way from like $5 all the way up to 300, and then it moved all the way back to 5, and now it's back at 300, right? So if there's something, obviously I'm not saying every stock could do this, but if there's something to ignite these stocks, specifically a theme, which we obviously clearly have in quantum, and quantum seems to be the future, and there's obviously a lot of demand there, so there's something to watch for, right? So I like these type of stocks. Specifically, I'm holding a lot of long-term in IONQ. I bought some RGTI as well, like I said. So there could be a theme here to continue to watch, right? Obviously, I'm not saying chase something like this, specifically like QBTS that already moved 50%, but look to see if things can develop here, right? That's kind of what I'm watching. So see if there's going to be some setups to look at. For example, remember when quantum started to really move higher, there were so many different entry opportunities you could take, right? So for example, if you missed the first leg, does not mean you have to chase and buy somewhere here. Wait for it to set back up again, right? So it'll set up into the moving averages, something like this or something like this. You could buy this breakout, right? Right here, you could buy this breakout, or right here, you could buy this breakout, right? So if a stock is going to be strong, and specifically if there's going to be a theme and a narrative and a trend, and this also like correlates to the market as well, you're always going to have a pullback to buy these, right? Because again, just like stocks don't go straight down, stocks just don't go straight up, right? They always come back and give you an entry. So that's what I'm going to be watching to potentially develop here on quantum stocks. Something interesting as well, guys. I like nuclear stocks. Why? Because remember when AI, data centers, and quantum stocks were kind of the theme and the buzz in like 2024? Stuff like OKLO, stuff like NNE, stuff like SMR, right? These type of stocks that were doing kind of like nuclear solutions for energy got some really good flows. And if quantum's going to come back, we're going to need a lot of energy to power those systems, right? So something like NNE, something like OKLO can make a pretty nice comeback as well, right? So look at OKLO. This one is down like almost 50% off the highs. It's all the way back at $24, right? So if quantum's going to make a return, this is another theme we could look at, right? And this is one that hasn't really, I mean, it was up 15% on Friday, but it didn't really make too big of a move yet considering how much upside potential it does have. So that's something to watch. For me, my favorite nuclear stock is NNE. Reason why is because it's already above the moving averages. So it's already kind of showing you that it's starting to reverse, made a higher low already as well. So that's one that I'm watching potentially for a really nice reversal in the coming weeks. So those are the 4 themes that I'm really paying attention to. Obviously, there's a lot of more themes in the market, but these are the ones that have shown us the best probability for moves to the upside. And again, specifically if the market reverses, right? If we make new lows and the market continues to downtrend and we get in a big correction, obviously these aren't really going to play out, right? But if we do see a reversal in the next coming week, specifically like going into next week, there is some upside potential in some of these names. So that's why I wanted to make sure you guys are paying attention to those. And those are the ones that I'm really focusing on too, going into the next few weeks. So yeah, that's going to be a recap of the sectors that I'm watching. In terms of the stocks that I'm looking at for a trade, I have a 4-name focus list going into the week. My favorite stocks that look really ready to make a move. The first one is going to be SMCI, right? So this one looks really good to me. I traded this one here on Tuesday last week and then kind of into Wednesday. Got a really nice gap up on this one, hit like a 100% return on options for it. I think it might set up for another move higher, right? Reason why I like something like this is because, again, it's already above the moving averages, right? So stuff, for example, like Amazon, way below the moving averages. So what does that tell you? Well, it tells you if it gets a pop, it's likely to get sold off very quickly. Why? Because whenever a stock's below the moving averages act as resistance. Whenever it's above the moving averages like this, the moving averages act as support, right? So it helps kind of guide the stock higher. It's kind of the trend of what's going on. So that's why I like something like SMCI. This one is also one that pulled in really nicely off the highs with very low volume, right? So that's exactly what we like to look for. We like to see high volume as the stock moves up, specifically when it's breaking out, and then lower volume as it pulls in. And this stock hasn't really gotten high volume yet at all, right? So the moment it gets some high volume, we know there's a very high probability it's going to get some nice follow through back to the high. So I think this one could be a stock that comes back up to 50 or 60 very, very quickly. Specifically, if the semiconductor sector kind of stays up and shows some strength, this one was kind of one of the stronger names on last week, right? Held up very, very well. Made a nice move higher, didn't make a new low when the market was making a new low. So I really like this one. It also has an inside day on Friday. So if you go down to the smaller time frames, you can clearly see it has a very key level here at 42.5. So if it breaks 42.5, I think we have an easy long at least back up to 45, but this can really make a quick move back up to like 49, 55, and maybe even 60, right? This stock moves a lot, like it moves super fast. The average daily range is like 12 or something percent. So that's could be a really, really big mover. It can move like $4 to $5 every single day. So one that I really, really like. Next one is LMND. We touched about this one shortly. I tried a long on this one last week. Ended up getting stopped out on this one, on this candle right here, but it ended up holding up pretty nicely the whole week, right? Overall, like it didn't make any new lows. It's still kind of consolidating, and it's still in this really, really big base. Now, we talked about insurance stocks being super strong. That's why I really like this stock. It's in a strong theme. It's above the moving averages and coiled like right into the moving averages. That's something I really like to see in a stock. When it's coiled into the moving averages, that's usually when the biggest moves are made, right? Like you can see right here, it got super coiled, big move up, right? So again, we want to make sure it breaks out first, but if it does break out, get through this trend line, a huge move potential could occur on this one. So I'm watching it for a very strong move to the upside. Break over 35.5 is going to be my trigger for that one. Now, the next one I'm looking at is Tesla. So this one is one that I usually don't really look for a long on, just because again, it's below the moving averages, right? The only reason I really like this one for a potential long is because of what I mentioned on stocks like ARK, right? And the index ARK, right? It's oversold. It's been down for consecutive weeks in a row, so we could look for an oversold bounce. Now, something like this, I would play with maybe smaller size because it's not above the moving averages. It's not a high probability long, but it does have a very key level that it's trading at, 250, right? You could see on the hourly time frame how important that level was the whole week. It rejected right here at 250, it broke down, made a new low, then it gapped up here to 250, rejected, came back down, made a higher low, came back up to 250, and it's been rejecting, right? So if it can get over 252, it has this gap to fill. It has a few more kind of big levels here to test up into this 285, 300 level. So this is strictly for an oversold bounce play, but I do think Tesla has some good potential, specifically if the markets do continue to bounce, right? That's going to be a pretty big key to see if that does play out. But it's so oversold off these lows. It came all the way down to this 218 level. We could see a little bit of a snapback, right? I'm not saying Tesla's going to go all the way back up to the highs, but it could potentially see maybe a move to like 300 from this 250 level. That would retest kind of like some of these big levels that it broke down under. So that could be a nice spot to watch. So that's another one that I'm looking at. You can also look for Tesla potentially to the downside as well, right? If the markets do move lower, you do have a potential bear flag setting up here. So we could look for this one to actually break down as well. So this could be an either way trade, going either way, but I like it for both sides. Honestly, it is very tight. So wherever it moves, it should give us a very nice move. Now, last but not least is going to be a short idea. This one's going to be on Amazon. The reason why I like this one to the downside, below the moving averages. Now, again, obviously we did say Tesla is below the moving averages as well, but I like that one to the upside. The only differential between those two and the reason why I like Tesla to the upside is because it's already down so much off the highs, right? This already led the move lower. So it's very overextended lower. It's down 55% from the highs, right? Something like Amazon is down a lot from the highs, but it's not down 55%, right? It's down 20%. And obviously I know Tesla does move usually more than Amazon, smaller cap, but a 20% move, obviously big discrepancy between a 55% move in like 3 weeks. So that's why I think Tesla has a better chance to bounce, and Amazon could continue to potentially move lower if that's the trend of the market. So for me, Amazon, I'm watching this kind of tight base that it's been forming. If you look at the hourly time frame, it has been getting really tight, right? It's been kind of in this space here. If it breaks the base lows, I think it continues to move lower. It is below all the moving averages, below the 8-day, below the 21-day, the 50. Those are all catching up. So we can continue to see a move lower on this one and see if this one can, get kind of pushing lower. If the markets do go lower, obviously that would confirm it. Also, something to note is the volume patterns, right? It had a ton of volume as it moved lower, and now as it's kind of bouncing, lower volume, right? So just like we look for higher volume when things are going up and then lower volume when they're pulling back to the upside, we actually look for the exact opposite to the downside trade. So we look for high volume when things are going down and low volume when things are going up, because that confirms to you that institutions aren't buying or getting back into the trade to the long side, and they're actually looking to get short again when things are moving in the direction of the trend. So that's why volume patterns are very important to look at for that. So yeah, that's gonna be a recap of my focus list. A few other setups that I really like. Already touched on a few, but NNE, I think this one could be a really good one. If it breaks over 30.5, I think this could easily see $50. ASTS, another great one to the long side. On the weekly time frame, it looks just absolutely phenomenal. It broke out of this big weekly base, this wedge here. Since then, it's just kind of been consolidating here on the weekly, forming kind of like this wedge or whatever you want to call this flag. But it does obviously have a really nice shape to it. Volume has been decreasing as price has been pulling in. So I think this one's ready for a potential big move back up to $33. So that one could be a nice long idea as well. Palantir looks really good. Also, it's coming off the highs, very similar idea to ASTS, failed to break lower, could potentially be ready for a reversal if it gets over the moving averages. Again, remember, when we're looking to long stuff, what we're looking at for a reversal trade is something called a wedge pop, right? So when you first reclaim the moving averages, does not necessarily mean that the trend is gonna be reversed, right? What you usually wanna look for is for price to reclaim the moving averages, test back into the moving averages, and pop, right? That's called the wedge pop, and that is like an 80 to 90% reversal confirmation. Instead of once you get above the moving averages to long, that's gonna be a much less probability of things actually starting to trend the other way, because it doesn't confirm, right? It doesn't confirm that the moving average is held, and now the trend is gonna be to the upside. So you do need that little snapback and hold to really confirm that the trend is going to continue in the direction of the other direction, right? Like flipping the trend. So that's what I would be watching for a reversal. Another stock to watch, Futu. Mentioned this one with all the China stocks. Looks absolutely phenomenal. I like this one over 121.5. Looks very, very good. A couple more, QBTS. Obviously, we want to pay attention to this one. It's already up 50%, so probably not going to chase it, but just to see what it does and how it sets up. AVGO, I think, is going to be very important as well. This one was very strong on Friday with earnings, and then since then it's held up pretty well. If NVIDIA, if SMH, if some of these semi stocks want to continue to bounce a little bit, I think AVGO could be a good candidate for a potential move back to the highs if the market's going to bounce. OKTA is